The universe has blessed us with not one, but two, and soon to be four, fully autonomous mini flying camera drones to choose from. Having used both the X1 and the Neo, here are some of my thoughts and opinions on how these two compare. The X1 is smaller when folded up and fits into a back jeans pocket. The Neo is still small, but not as pocketable as the X1. It doesn't fold in half, but that design choice makes it very strong. I've never damaged my X1 in any of its crashes, but if I had to place money on which frame design would survive the biggest impact, my money's on the Neo. I've tested them side by side in various lighting conditions, and in my opinion, most of the time, the Neo produces better looking footage, especially in lower light, when the X1 produces a lot more noise. But in good light, the difference is quite small and sometimes not really noticeable without pixel peeping. And I was surprised by that, because the Neo records in 4K, whereas the X1 can only do 2.7K. But when comparing the Neo to other DJI cameras, we can see that the Neo's 4K labeling might be more useful as a marketing tool than as an indicator of quality, as it's noticeably worse than the lower 2.7K of the Mini 2S. My main criticism of the X1 footage is that there's a bit too much contrast, too much noise, and the shadows tend to get crushed. The Neo preserves a little bit more detail in the shadows, giving nicer looking footage. Where the Neo struggles more than the X1 though, is with strong direct light. It produces quite dramatic lens flare. Both drones can do the usual trick shots like orbit and zoom out, and here are a couple of those side by side. They can both follow the user from behind when running or riding a bike, and both do a great job of tracking and filming the rider. However, the Neo is slower than the X1, so I find that as I begin to hit 13 and 14 miles per hour, the Neo starts to fall behind, and once I go over 15 miles per hour or 24 kilometers per hour, the Neo just loses me. In this clip I got both drones to follow me in a race, and the X1 is faster and more easily able to stay behind. The X1 is able to follow at a higher altitude than the Neo. With the Neo set to the highest it can go, it's still low enough that it makes me nervous when there's oncoming traffic, because it might hit a vehicle like a taller pickup truck. You can see here that the X1's highest setting is a few feet above the Neo. Tracking from the front is where the X1 is pretty much on its own. It has no trouble flying backwards and keeping me in frame, even at quite high speeds. On the Neo, this feature is basically unusable. There's still a lot of work to do there, and hopefully a future update can improve it. The Neo has one really big feature that the X1 doesn't share, and that's the ability to pair with one of DJI's remotes and be used like one of their larger drones. It has the O4 image transmission hardware, which is capable of up to 10 kilometers range, though the battery life limits the flights to about 1 kilometer. I can get slightly more than that, but because the Neo can't fly very fast and doesn't do very well in wind, it's extremely risky to go farther than that. The first time I flew it in wind and I was on my way back, my speed dropped to 0 kilometers per hour and I almost sharded my pants. I had to lower my altitude before I could get moving again, and I made it home right as it was auto landing. But as I said in my full Neo review, having the option to fly it like a larger camera drone, even for short durations, is a really big feature to have and makes the Neo more versatile than the X1. It can also be paired with FPV goggles. Neither drone has proper obstacle avoidance, but last year I took the X1 to follow me around in this small cluster of trees, and it managed to avoid hitting anything. When I tested the Neo in the same location this week, it crashed a couple of times, but I didn't feel this was a fair test because the trees have grown more branches since last year, and I'm wearing different clothes. So I tested the X1 right after the Neo, and it crashed a couple of times too. So I can't really say that one is better than the other in this test. Both drones have buttons on the body that allow you to select the mode you want, like orbit or follow. The X1's button also lets you customize some of the basic parameters of some of the modes. For example, the orbit distance or the height of the bird's eye shot. To change parameters on the Neo, you'll need to use the app. The Neo comes with no fly zones, so if you live near an airport, it'll try to stop you from taking flight, even if you just want to use it for a family selfie in your back garden. I live far enough away from the nearest airport that none of my DJI drones have stopped me taking off before. But the Neo seems to be a bit sensitive, because so far there's been one time when it wouldn't let me fly at my home for that reason. The X1 has no such restrictions. I'd like to see the Neo get an update that would drop those restrictions when using it as a selfie drone without a remote. When my X1 was new, I was getting about 10 minutes of flight time in follow mode. It's about a year old now, and I probably have about 60 or 70 charges on each of the two batteries, and now I can only get 5 to 6 minutes of flight time. The Neo is brand new, so it's too soon to say how the batteries will hold up over time, but right now I'm getting a fairly consistent 14 minutes when hovering or in follow mode, and about 10 minutes of flight time using it with the remote before it wants to auto land. These drones are competing directly with one another, but each excels in different areas, and so it's difficult for me to say which is the better choice. As a standalone selfie drone, the Neo is a much cheaper purchase. It has slightly better video quality in most situations, and it can do a lot more than the X1 when you add a remote. I think for value for money, the Neo is the clear winner. But as a follow-me drone, it falls behind the X1, literally and figuratively, being less reliable, being unable to keep up at speed, and being unable to track from the front without losing its mind. It has those geo restrictions, and the mode parameters can't be changed using the on-body buttons. If DJI can release an update that greatly improves the tracking, especially from the front, and adds a bit more speed in follow mode, and lets us change the mode parameters using the buttons on the body, the Neo for me would be the clear winner. But as it stands right now, it's a draw. If you found this useful or interesting, I always appreciate a thumbs up. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.